Propulsion continues to be normal.
Our chamber pressure looks good.
Doubling up. Roger, roll, Atlantic.
Water towers can fly! Yes!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight downside, SCE off. Bring in, SCE off.
Yikes. You bet.
Concur.
We don't need any more of these.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of What is Falcon 9 doing today? We are watching at a Falcon 9 on pad 40 here with the Amazonas Nexus mission, and we are here for the launch coverage and everything you need to know about this launch before it will happen in hopefully 40 minutes from now, on the mark kind of here. My name is Arianespace. I'm a writer for NASASpaceflight and I'm not alone today. I'm joined by Chris G. Chris, how is it going?
It's going very, very well, though I have to say, as a German, not even trying my last name, Adrian.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have said your name. Also, it's because we have two people actually with German last names today here in the.
Oh, I see.
call.
Thomas is your favorite. That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, now I will also say Thomas B here in the call as well. Thomas, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing well, Adrian. Thank you so much. You're looking live at Space Launch Complex 40. Falcon 9 is ready to go after a weather delay and then a couple more hours of delay for pre-launch checkouts, but it appears we are on track for our launch attempt tonight, and it is a beautiful night to go to space.
And another person joining us here is Mr. Kevin Michael Reed, who gets our name in this case. So you make of that what you will. Who is doing the launch, the broadcast operation here, which is very important because we all couldn't do that. And remember about this launch, if you have any questions to ask, if you we want to make this interactive with you, so make sure to tag at NASASpaceflight in chat if you have any questions to us, and we will answer this in the next 38 minutes. But before we do that, Chris, want to give us a rundown of what is happening today?
I think that is definitely in order because this is a customer payload mission for SpaceX with Hispasat's Amazonas Nexus satellite. So this is part of the overall Amazonas constellation of telecommunications satellites that are positioned over North and South America and provide not just terrestrial-based communication, but also maritime-based communication. And this network also, specifically with this satellite, services Greenland and other remote portions of North and South America. So very important geographically for this particular part of the world. Overall, the satellite is 4.5 metric tons in mass, and it will be launched by the Falcon 9 into a geostationary transfer orbit, and we'll get to a little bit about how that works and how that orbit is different from a few other Falcon family missions we have seen flown recently, most notably on the Falcon Heavy. But overall, this satellite will eventually reside in geostationary orbit 35,786 kilometers above average sea level, in case anyone was wondering. And it will be located at the 61 degree west location. So if you imagine the coordinate map laid out over the Earth, if you go to the equator and you find 61 degrees west, that is the position that the satellite will be directly over and should give it a very good view of the hemisphere. And taking it to orbit tonight is Falcon 9 with booster B1073-6. This booster previously launched the SES-22 mission, the iSpace Hakuto R mission just a couple of months ago, in which it returned to landing zone 2 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station on December 11th. It has also launched 3 Starlink missions, making it the 6th flight for this particular booster today. And that's a brief overview of what's on board and where it's going.
And a quick overview about the future of this booster. It's a Falcon Heavy to be, because once this mission hopefully goes successful with the landing, it will become one of the side boosters for the EchoStar 24 Falcon Heavy mission. So just an interesting side note here, because they now start to really interchange between all these boosters and what they are doing. And this is a Falcon Heavy to be. So looking forward to that.
And as you say, a Falcon Heavy to be, this is also one of the boosters that had a rare debut launch as a Starlink booster as well.
Quite an interesting manifest, I would call this. It's kind of getting the commercial payloads later into its lifetime, which is a rare sight we see on Falcon 9. So interesting for sure.
It really is. And, like we're about to step into propellant loading here in 21 seconds. And it will be another fascinating flight to GTO for this particular booster.
Thomas, I have a trajectory question and orbit question here.
Oh, those are my favorite.
Could you explain to us what a GTO exactly is?
I sure can, yeah. So today's flight is going to geostationary transfer orbit, and that differs from your direct geo insertions, your geostationary missions, in one key element. So today's flight will drop the satellite off originally in just a low Earth orbit, like a parking orbit. And I should interrupt my answer just to confirm that the launch auto sequence has started and propellant load is now underway. But so first the upper stage will insert into a low Earth orbit parking orbit. And then there'll be a brief coast phase as the upper stage and the attached satellite coast towards the equator. And once it's about to cross the equator, it will light a second time to raise the apogee, or the highest point of this orbit, out to geostationary altitude, or just about geostationary altitude. Sometimes just above or just below, depending on how exactly they set up the maneuvering for the satellite itself. And the reason you do that burn over the equator is so that your highest point on the orbit is also over the equator, and that way the most efficient point for you to raise the rest of your orbit up to geostationary altitude is over the equator, which is the plane that this satellite will eventually orbit. It is geostationary, which means that the orbit will be parallel directly over the equator. And that'll be the final burn for the upper stage of today's flight. It'll drop off the satellite, and the satellite will do the rest of its maneuvering for itself. That'll be a combination of reducing its inclination down to 0. So again, it stays over the equator at all times. And then also raising the lowest point, or the perigee, of its orbit up to geostationary altitude to make its orbit circular again. The only difference between that and a regular GEO mission that happens a little bit more rarely, but has happened on the previous Falcon Heavy missions, for example, is when the upper stage actually coasts with the satellite all the way up to geostationary altitude after the GTO burn, and then conducts a third burn to circularize the orbit. That's not happening tonight. That is usually only reserved for missions where you have enough propellant margin to do that third burn, such as Falcon Heavy. But Falcon 9 on its own is much more better suited for just a Falcon 9, a Falcon 9 flight, and the spacecraft will do that final circularization itself. But final point on that is that because it does want to get eventually to an inclination of 0, the Falcon 9 will head due east from Florida so that that initial parking orbit is as low inclination as possible. So we'll be flying due east from the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station as well, and there you have it.
And waiting in the orange box for the booster will be just to read the instructions. Is the drone ship for tonight?
Good overview of you both. Thank you so much. Let's dive into questions, because we have some, and that's always the best part, to answer some of your questions here. Quick question here, probably for both of you, since you're both in Florida. How is the weather looking for this launch? How is it looking in weather?
Yeah, so I'll just offer that yesterday looked much worse than today. Yesterday, we, of course, were originally expecting this launch, and it got delayed till tonight because the weather forecast was so poor. Lots of clouds and storms in the area. Today, there is not a cloud in the sky. There wasn't even at the beginning of the window. The sky was also perfectly clear. A little bit windy on the ground, but nothing that would have prevented a launch. And that did not come to be, not because of weather reasons, but because of final technical checks. But the weather is still crystal clear 3 hours into the window, which is what they are now targeting. You can see plenty of stars in the sky. We got a bright full moon in the sky as well. Should hopefully have wonderful visuals of the launch on the way up.
And that looks like some pretty good. Is that sea states, Kevin? Is that what we're showing here?
I think
Um,
that's just radar that shows zero clouds.
or
I think
radar
is
show
all that is.
or gotcha. Radar with zero clouds is exactly what that is. Yep. So very, very good.
It shows you
Yeah,
how rare that is if people are puzzling what we exactly see because it's so clear. Like
Yeah.
this is very rare.
Thank the front that came through for clearing it out. But Alex is also noting in our back channel that because of the exceptionally clear conditions, if you are in Florida and close to the eastern coast, there's the potential for the moon jellyfish effect. And what we mean by that is there are some launches when the moon angle is right and the moon is large enough in its cycle and near full where it can actually create the lighting conditions necessary to see the second stage plume, which does not look as spectacular as it does in evening or in morning, but it looks purple. It looks illuminated like it's purple by the moon. So there is a potential to see that tonight because it is so exceptionally clear. And also, if you're on the coastline of Florida too, don't leave when the stages separate because if you keep following the second stage, you'll be able to see stage 1 entry burn on the horizon. So if you are on the beach or on the eastern side of Florida, definitely some visuals to watch out for tonight.
There you go. Another question here by Mr. V. Peters that I actually can answer is, are we on track for 100 Falcon launches this year? I recently had a conversation on the NSF Discord about that, because we were looking at some numbers there, and the answer is no. The answer is right now, this pace they are showing right now over the course of January and the beginning of February, this would only put them at about 70 to 80. They would have to pick up the pace. Yeah, only. Sorry, but in the context of this question, they're missing right now the target. They would have to launch even faster than they are launching right now to get to 100 launches, which really shows you how big of a challenge launching 100 times in a year is.
Yeah. Now, it is. Now, I also want to point something out that might be, and Adrian, you're going to really love this because it's a statistical point that you can track on a spreadsheet. Yes. Is remember too, there became a huge backlog of commercial satellites that ended up not being able to launch basically in the last year because of an issue with the reaction wheels from Honeywell. Honeywell is almost the exclusive provider of reaction wheels to many, many Western nation satellites, and this really messed up the launch manifest. One reason SpaceX was able to do as many missions as they did last year was the Starlink flights. But Starlinks will always take back seats to the customer payloads. So we are starting to see the flood of those commercial missions come back as the reaction wheel issue has been fixed and addressed. Some of those reaction wheels are literally showing up a month before the satellite launches. But we're seeing that. So I'm going to be really interested in what is the answer to that question in June or May, right, when we maybe start to see the manifest balance back out between Starlinks and customer payloads.
Yeah, that's with all of these suppliers, we always talk very linearly, I would say, about just the payload and then the rocket. But there's a whole like chain of things that lead all the way into building these satellites and building these rockets. So and since it's not a very it's not they're not millions of satellite produced every year, so there's not millions of thousands of providers to look at for some of these hardware. So if one of them has a problem, it affects probably a lot of companies instantly. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to see in terms of like industry look, right?
Really is.
Let's see. Ignoring weather and reliability issues, how possible logistically is it that SpaceX could launch once a day? Thomas, wanna tackle that question? I think that's a no.
Yeah, in case he's doing something with technical, I'll take that one.
Yes.
So yeah, if you exclude weather problems and reliability issues, but both good caveats, you knew where we were going to go with that at first. Possible from a logistics standpoint of launching every single day. Well, you can't turn 40 around that fast. You can't turn 39A around that fast, and you can't turn Slick 4E around that fast. So it actually is just coming down to the pads themselves. It is what's really going to, coupled with you didn't say reusability. You didn't say reusability and refurbishment. Coupled with the refurbishment and what you see on the flights, those are going to be the two other main driving factors, and the pads are going to be your bottleneck. Very specifically because while you can be processing multiple single stick Falcon 9s in the horizontal integration facility or HIF at 39A, you can only do one at a time at 40, and you can only do one at a time at 4E out in Vandenberg. So the pads are just going to make that tricky to near impossible to do.
Hey guys, I'm back.
It's basically, and sorry, yes, and I got one more thing. Sorry, Alex is saying, basically in terms of pad turnaround, it's something like one launch every 2 days, and then you also have the drone ship issue.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna add, is that unless you had way more RTLS missions, drone ship availability is actually probably the limiting factor on launch cadence at this point. They're pretty close right now. I think they've been operating fairly close to their theoretical maximum under the current configuration as far as pads and drone ships go.
Which again shows like 100 really needs, everything needs to align for 100 launches a year. Everything needs to work.
However, this will be aided when they have a new family of rockets that is launching from different pads and don't need drone ships.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the return of Falcon 1.
Ha ha.
That's just a joke. Don't report this. I had to, Thomas. But yeah, Starship. So, but do we like, Thomas? Would you expect or that Starship would contribute to the launch, like to relevant numbers to the 100 for this year? Or what do you think?
Not in maybe in a significant way, but I hope it'll add at least one to this year's counter. Ideally, maybe even 2 or 3.
And hey, there it is.
And hey, right on cue. Appreciate that, Kevin. Yeah, it'll give a couple. I'm not sure they're going to hit 100 this year, but I think if they split the difference between the record they set last year and the goal of 100, and then Starship is the first couple Starship flights have gone well, they're certainly on their way to not only. I'm sorry, I just got interrupted by a shooting star above me. Sorry. But not only improving and maybe even smoothing Falcon 9 operations a little bit more, but Starship cadence could ramp up. And so maybe next year they'll hit 100, something like that.
And there is always the biggest caveat of all, right? Like, we all sort of understand odds in first-time flight, but don't discount SpaceX.
Yeah, true.
We all know the odds, but first orbital flight could be a success. And if it is, they're going to go for it, safely, but they're going to go for it if it works, the first time. Yeah,
it's betting against SpaceX had probably some negative impact on somebody's bad predictions in the past, or like bad chances. Like they tend to really go for very crazy goals and stuff. So we'll see how this develops over the year. I want to thank some people here because we received some super chats, and as you know, they really are very essential for what we do here. So I want to take the time here to thank the people that gave some super chats to us. We're starting with a very regular person to do this. Musical Wolves, $5. How often do jellyfish effects get caused by lunar light? It's a question for you both. Like, how often does it happen that we see lunar jellyfish?
Yeah, they are by far the rarest of what we consider to be the jellyfish effects. 2-3 times a year, Thomas. I mean, they're not that common, and you need exceptionally clear skies, and you need either the moon at the right angle or the moon at the right phase, or both. It's tricky to do.
Yeah, I think the it seems maybe recently that jellyfish launches are actually happening more frequently, but I think that's just because launches are happening more frequently, so do the math. Jellyfish effects overall are not super common, and the lunar effect is less so, not only because you don't have an opportunity every single sunrise or sunset, you also basically need a full moon and the angle to be proper. So maybe a couple times a year. Certainly have a chance for it tonight, though.
There we go. Mason with $4.99. Any chance I'll see this from Jacksonville Beach? Thomas, is there a chance this is visible from Jacksonville Beach?
Absolutely, yeah. And especially, I believe it's clear all the way up to Jacksonville. So absolutely, anyone in Florida should be able to catch a glimpse of this. If you look whatever direction it is towards Cape Canaveral and to the east out over the ocean, you should absolutely be able to catch a glimpse of tonight's launch.
Go, Greg with $4.99. Is it possible to be in geostationary orbit at a latitude other than the equator?
Ooh, this is
Thomas.
a great question.
Oh, 20-minute vent, and go, Thomas.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Thank you. Yeah, 20-minute vent. You can also see some vapors forming on the first stage, as we've talked. That's a good visual indicators that propellant load is proceeding well, and that vent means that they have finished RP1 kerosene load into the upper stage and are beginning liquid oxygen load on the upper stage. But back to the question, yes and no. Technically, it's not a geostationary orbit if it's not above the equator, but you can have a geosynchronous orbit that is not above the equator. And basically what that happens is that your inclination isn't exactly zero. You're still at the same altitude, but your inclination is not exactly zero. And so what the satellite will do from the point of view of a perspective on the of a observer on the ground, it'll kind of oscillate in the sky over the course of the day. It'll draw this little figure eight kind of path in the sky, and it can stay in like roughly the same position, but it allows you to reach slightly higher and lower latitudes with communication services, for example. These are also often used for not just communications, but other military assets that need to reach those higher and lower latitudes. So yes, a geosynchronous orbit does exist, and basically all a geostationary orbit is a geosynchronous orbit that has an inclination of zero. Geostationary are more commonly used, but yes, you can have geosynchronous with a slightly different inclination.
And in fact, NASA's very first tracking and data relay satellite, TDRS-A, which was launched by Challenger in 1983, had an upper stage inertial unit failure on the second stage of that unit, propelling it up to geostationary orbit, which actually stranded it in geosynchronous orbit.
I love the small little like nerd facts that we can always just add to these, where it's like, I love it. Also, I kind of nerd here for a moment because Ceterius is asking, are you saying lunar jellyfish are the rare shiny Pokemon? No, because the chance to shiny Pokemon to appear is 1 to 4,096. This is more common.
Oh my god.
Yes, sorry, I had to flex that knowledge.
Rocket, vapors.
Chris is lost.
I'm sorry.
Must get back. Where is shuttle? No.
Roseanne with $19.99. Love full moon launches. Thanks, guys. Thanks for being here. And Jared, also very regular in chat, with 5 gifted Red Team memberships. If you received one of these,
nice.
Make sure to thank Jared in chat, because that really gives you cool perks you can use and get like behind the scenes content and pictures on the YouTube channel. So make sure to check that out. And that's very generous of you. Thank you so much for that. Space Podcast is asking, how do QD plates separate from the rocket? Is there springs doing this? Chris, how do QD separate?
Yeah, so not springs. So the quick disconnects on that fuel the rocket, that's what QDs are, the quick disconnects. There's a flight side plate and a ground side plate. And usually the way that they separate is they're basically held on a lot of times by pneumatic force. Nowadays, there used to be bolts, there used to be separation pyros on some vehicles, but it's usually pneumatics now that do it. And basically the ground side plate is the one that separates, and the flight plate goes with the rocket. And it's usually the arm that the quick disconnect plate is attached to that pulls the whole thing back. And it's usually hydraulics, pneumatics, stuff like that that physically pull it back at this point. There are sometimes like other ways that you can make sure that the seal is there, but mostly it's pressure that we use now.
And I instantly, Robert Hobson with 50 Red Team membership gifts. Thank you so much. Wow. Yeah, the chat is exploding with that right now. So thank you so much, and make sure to thank that. I had to mention that instantly as I saw it. That's so generous of you. Thank you so much. And just to update you on the timeline here, we have stage 2 LOX load underway at this point, and also the spacecraft has transitioned to internal power. So they are very progressing in this countdown, which only has 15 minutes to go. So we are, well progressing in this countdown. It's so far looking very normal, as it's usual with Falcon 9. It tends to be very, very calm and normal.
And really quick, I'll touch on this because I don't think we touch on this on every launch. Not every launch actually has this as part of the countdown. But the call out that spacecraft is on internal power, what the significance of that is, until now, the satellite has been connected to a ground umbilical on the transporter erector that has been providing electrical power to the satellite. And the reason you have that is because, of course, for example, this rocket rolled out yesterday and has been sitting on the pad since last night. And if you had sat there with full batteries and then not had any ground connection, batteries might have been dead by now. And so you need to keep the batteries fully charged until just before launch. Part of the reason that geostationary missions have a bit of a window like tonight, but also tend to launch in the evening, roughly, it depends on the exact mission, is because once this rocket does lift off and makes its trip to space, and once that second burn happens on the upper stage and the spacecraft deploys, you want the spacecraft to be in sunlight, because between now and spacecraft separation, that satellite's going to be running on battery power only. And of course, if the batteries are dead when you deploy, well, you're not going to unfold your solar antennas, your other antennas, solar arrays and antennas, other things like that. So they time these launches where you can take ground power until the last couple minutes of the countdown, and then when that spacecraft deploys, it will deploy into sunlight, can immediately deploy arrays once it gets far enough away from the rocket, and start generating power again, charge up those batteries, and it'll be good to go for its mission. So just something to touch on there.
Yeah, and actually, while you're mentioning that, and specifically with Amazonas Nexus now on internal power, worth talking about the satellite itself, the star of today's show, even though you can't see it. Yes, because this is a pretty important telecommunications satellite for Hispasat. And specifically, there it is. That is the exact one in question, as it was completed at Thales Alenia Space. So a truly international effort here, getting this particular satellite that will cover North and South America and Greenland up into space. It is Hispasat is a Spanish company, and Thales Alenia Space is based in Italy. Overall, the satellite is 4.5 metric tons. This is some video of its shipment from the production facility, and then its trip to Florida for liftoff. But overall, this 4.5 metric ton satellite will operate at the 61-degree west position in geostationary orbit, where it will provide not just terrestrial, but also maritime shipping channel communication coverage and communication coverage in Greenland, a very remote part of North America. Overall, this will join 5 other Amazonas satellites in space, and it is taking over for Amazonas 2, which was launched on an Ariane 5 rocket back in 2009. And one of those moments when you're like, oh, wow, I've been in this industry a long time. I remember covering that mission's launch, and now here it is getting replaced. So there are definitely things with that. The last thing I do want to mention about the satellite, though, it is, even though Thales Alenia Space built the satellite, the bus, the brains of the satellite, is a Spacebus Neo platform. And that was developed by the European Space Agency in a partnership with the French National Space Agency, CNES. So a truly international effort for this particular satellite. But Thomas, you mentioned solar array deployment, so I will definitely hit that this craft has 2 solar panels, both deployable, like you said, and they provide 20 kilowatts of power for the hundreds of communication channels that are on board this particular satellite. It also has a digital transparent processor, which will allow Hispasat to alter the types of communication that it does based on market demand. So a versatile satellite as well. And also definitely worth mentioning that just before liftoff here, the U.S. Space Force actually confirmed that there is a Space Systems Command hosted payload on board called Pathfinder 2.
I always find it very interesting if people mention Thales Alenia because they tend to fly a bit under the radar, I would say. Like, they are not really the company that is always mentioned first. But once you look what they build, it's crazy in how many space programs they are involved, including
Every
parts of the
pressure
ISS.
vessel, I was just going to say, every pressure vessel on the U.S. side of the International Space Station is Thales Alenia, and Axiom went right back to them for the Axiom modules. And they also build the pressure vessel for Cygnus, I believe, too.
And they build parts of the European service module for Orion as well.
There we go. Yep.
They are basically they are really involved in a lot of human spaceflight projects. So it's always interesting when they come up because it's a company that is not really like SpaceX, for example, always in the center of attention.
But hard to imagine spaceflight without them.
Absolutely. Coming up here on 10 minutes, I want to point out another thing that you can do to support us, which is our shop and our merch. We have a new collection, which is a collection that is very much on topical for today's launch because it's a Falcon 9 launch entry and landing collection. You can see it right here. It's I really love it, and I cannot point out enough how comfy our hoodies are. I really love them. I'm wearing them actually right now because it's quite cold and quite late in Germany. So I really love these designs. You can see all the different engine configuration a Falcon 9 will have during launch, entry, and landing. It's a very topical design, I feel like, for today's launch. And if you want to support us and also get something in return, this is probably the best way to go. But make sure to check out at shop.nasaspaceflight.com for checking out these hoodies and mugs and everything you would probably enjoy at home during a launch. And back to the launch. Let's hit some more questions here. What kind of damage is done to the launch pad and tower during a launch? Is there any damage visible on launch pad and tower during the launch? Chris? Thomas.
Yeah, it depends on the rocket. Is the honest answer to that. It depends on the rocket. The Falcon, SpaceX has really built 39A, 40, and Slick 4E to take what the Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavies produce. Is there damage? There's always going to be little things that you've got to go in and fix and replace, but in large part, no. There's not a lot of significant damage. In fact, if you watch right at liftoff from the view that Thomas will have at the press site, you will see the transporter erector throw back very, very quickly to a 45-degree angle, and that is to protect a lot of the plumbing and the interfaces on it as Falcon 9 lifts off. And that throwback maneuver actually saves a lot of time in the turnaround because you can reuse a lot of what is on that TE without having to replace it. The TE being the transporter erector, the gray structure there hugging Falcon 9. There we go. Now, SLS, on the other hand, blast doors were missing. ULA has gotten really good with Atlas. They'll be even better with Vulcan because of how quickly they want to turn that pad around. So yeah, the launch companies are getting really, really good at minimizing that damage to the pad infrastructure that rockets do.
Yeah, and also there's the everlasting question about Starship's first orbital launch and what it will do to the pad. So
well, you noted I left that out.
Yeah, there is some questions open there as well, because that could also be a bit spicy for the pad.
Well, it could in many of the same ways that SLS was, because you can model all of this, but if you are literally trying to launch a vehicle with a force that produces a force that has never been produced like that, in history, in that manner, you really have to go through Flight 1 to really understand what it's going to do when it lifts off. And remember, Starship is almost basically twice as powerful as SLS was at the moment of liftoff. So, yeah.
Yeah, at some point it gets quite ridiculous to try to contain this power in some way or form.
It is
It's just so much power. So we'll see how they will do it.
Yes, but also it is not just the booster being reflown today. I know this question probably comes up a lot. So the booster is making its 6th flight today, as well as one half of the payload fairing is also making its 6th flight, and the other payload fairing half is making its 5th. So the second stage in the satellite are the brand new components on this rocket tonight.
It's kind of cool to see these fairings slowly but surely also getting higher flight scores, I would say.
Yeah.
Because you really can see how they're trying to improve fairing recovery as well. Of course, that was the complicated history. We're first trying to catch them, and then now starting to fish them, and you can really see evolution there, and they're getting quite good at it, and they're getting views out of them more and more. So another cool step, because I don't like throwaway hardware.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that's a perfect segue there, because each one of those fairing halves is $3 million to produce, roughly. So if you can recover it, that's $6 million of recoverable hardware sitting right there. The fairings.
Yeah, that's it always sounds a bit trivial if you just explain like what a fairing does. So people are like, how is that 3 million? And then you notice, well, it needs to withstand a lot of force. So it's expensive to produce something that withstands a lot of force, but also it's very, like it's not just trivial. It's there's some electronics, there's some things hosted in these fairings. There's a deployment like desperation mechanisms that all costs money. So,
and on top of that, they're not cheap too, because they have to provide, they're purging that compartment right now to keep the satellite healthy, to keep the satellite ready to go. And there are little vents on it so that it naturally equalizes the pressure in the fairing chamber as the rocket climbs out of the atmosphere and into the vacuum. But a big part of the fairing's job is to keep the satellite healthy and protected. So they're not cheap.
Quick overview here of the next 4 minutes, because we are approaching the business end of the countdown. You can now see the strong back starting to retract, which is to prepare it to be a bit more away from the rocket when it launches. It will get further away during the launch, but it's now starting to move away from the very soon to be very hot stick. So that's the first what we will see here, but we'll also see the T-2 minute vent, which will come up at T-2 minutes, as the name indicates. And that will be like one of the last visual indicators we get before liftoff, which will then, the one last thing we really get as a call out is the transition to internal power of the Falcon 9, which will happen in 1 minute. And once that happens, we just hear go for launch and hopefully see a liftoff. So that's the next 4 minutes. And now it's 3 minutes because I talked 1 minute.
And as we get into the launch itself here, just under 3 minutes from now, worth noting too, because of the mass of the payload at only 4.5 metric tons, this is one of those missions where the second stage will reach its initial parking orbit 8 minutes, 6 seconds after liftoff per the predicted timeline, and 24 seconds later is the first stage booster landing. So one of those interesting missions where the second stage reaches orbit before the first stage performs its landing. So be ready for that as well.
And a quick question here, since this is a GTO, the second stage will not deorbit, right? It will go to a graveyard parking orbit, right?
Yeah, basically.
Yes. And on that note, Tom... Oh, God.
No, all good.
Thomas, I think you will leave us for until after the launch, right? Because you're now on tracking duty.
Yep, I'm going to do my best. We should, again, very clear night, so everyone stay tuned. Hopefully going to have some great visuals tonight's launch. And if you're in Florida, definitely take a look. Should be a beautiful evening to watch a launch. But I will leave you with Chris and Adrian for your liftoff commentary. See you later, guys.
Here we go. Good luck, Thomas, with the tracking. So just 1 minute and 40 seconds to go. We will relay every important call we will get on this. Stage 2 LOX load is complete at this point. So yeah, this rocket, it's a rocket actually, is almost ready for launch. So yeah, there's the T-minus 2 minute event, by the way, still going. I kind of missed it to call it out when it started to happen, but it's happening. So
Indeed. So this is the final purge, getting everything ready, basically clearing out all of the propellant and oxidizer lines in the transporter erector to make sure that nothing flammable, nothing ignitable is still there. And at 1 minute and counting, Falcon 9 should at this point be in startup and should be pressurizing its tanks to flight levels.
There we go. And startup confirmed. So the next thing we will hear is the launch director verifying go for launch, which will happen very, very soon. And once that is happening, we are go for launch was given. So that's the final step we will get. And the next thing you will see, and watch for this, is a green flash at the bottom of the rocket. That's the T-tab igniting the 9 Merlin engines.
And you'll probably see the sound suppression system firing here in just a couple of seconds at the base of Falcon 9 as well. And there you go. You can see the water is on.
And we should see the ignition any second now. There it is. There was the T-tab. And we have ignition of Falcon 9 with the Amazonas Nexus mission.
Go, baby, go.
And we will be quiet now in a second because the sound will hit the microphones very soon, so you will be able to enjoy these beautiful sounds.
And minute and 12 seconds, Falcon 9 passing through max Q, maximum mechanical stress on the vehicle, moment of maximum dynamic pressure. And if you really had a good ear there, about 45 seconds in, you could hear the vehicle assembly building doing the Scooby-Doo swamp monster squeal, which was awesome.
That's a very technical term right there.
It is, yes, very, very technical there.
Yeah. So next up would be Miko, which comes at 2 minutes and 30 seconds. But of course, before that, we hope, or like during this all, we hope that we might see the moon jellyfish soon. So that's what we are waiting here for. And you can see now the plume expansion as the pressure from the outside is getting lower and lower, and the plume is expanding more and more as it gets less compressed from the atmosphere.
It is indeed, and this is the shot from Michael's fully autonomous tracker. And ooh, look at that flame.
That's cool.
That was cool.
Miko yeah, here we go. I think that's Miko. Yeah,
that was Miko. Yep.
And next up would be the separation of both stages, which will happen any second now. There we go. And the second stage, which start up very soon. This is probably a bit later than you see it on Starlink missions, because on Starlink mission, they tend to fire up everything a bit faster to get even more performance margins. They tend to not do that on commercial missions. So
look at the air glow around Falcon 9 and the exhaust of, oh my gosh, look at all that with the view of Florida in the background. I mean, those lights are Daytona and Jacksonville.
Oh,
Wow.
there we go.
And there it is. There it is. You guys were asking for it. That is the moon jellyfish happening.
Wow. That's so cool. Beautiful.
Yeah, and you can see the stars that Falcon 9 is as Falcon 9 continues on the way to orbit, but that is the second stage Merlin vacuum engine firing as seen from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and this is Michael's tracking camera again. Wow. Oh, and the payload fairings have separated. You can see the Amazonas Nexus satellite there. Well, before they switched back to the Merlin vacuum engine. The Merlin vacuum engine is the one, the obvious one, on your right, and the only one on your screen now. But you can see the first stage telemetry data in the lower left-hand portion of your screen. You can see that its altitude still increasing as its velocity continues to decrease here as it coasts up to its individual apogee, or the highest point in its overall arc. And look at that. That is Michael's
Wow.
tracking camera on the right of that Merlin engine on the left firing. That is what it looks like on the ground at Kennedy. And this is what Thomas and I were talking about. The conditions were just right for the possible moon jellyfish. And that's a lot of what we're seeing here tonight, is the moon continuing to illuminate those crystals that are freezing in the atmosphere as the propellant is burned and thrust out the back of the Merlin engine here.
It has a bit of these a bit more funkier science fiction novels about like space leviathans and everything.
Yes.
Like, that's what I'm thinking about during this. Really cool to see.
It really is. And second stage still doing good, taking Amazonas Nexus into its initial Earth parking orbit. The booster itself has reached apogee a few seconds ago and is falling now. You can see that its speed is increasing, which is exactly what we would expect as it falls back into the atmosphere and gets pulled by gravity back down toward the planet. The entry burn that is coming up here for the booster will help not only slow it down as it enters the dense lower atmosphere, but will also help thermally protect the bottom of the booster. And ironically, you thermally protect it by firing fire at the atmosphere, and you create a fire shield, basically. And that is how you protect part of your rocket thermally as it's coming back in for retro propulsion. Thomas is setting up to hopefully get the entry burn. Here, this is what you are seeing on the right-hand side of your screen is Michael's tracking camera still, and the plume that is still visible from that camera as the propellants are burned out of Falcon 9. Just incredible, Adrian.
Yeah, it's just like I love these unique views you don't get all the time. Like I think at
Speaking
daytime we
of-
have. Oh, there we go. Oh, that's Thomas.
This is Thomas tracking the entry burn on the horizon of the booster. That booster is about 600 kilometers east of where it was just 6.5 minutes ago when it left the launch pad. And that is the retropropulsive burn that it is doing to slow itself down. Wow.
That's so cool. That's like getting that so perfectly. Amazing job, Thomas. Like that was amazing.
That was incredible. Look at that. And
Yeah.
look at the... Ooh, my goodness. That's the moon in the booster shot, by the way. That is the moon. And look at this booster coming in hot. Look at the heat around those grid fins. My goodness. That was incredible. Major props to Thomas on that track and knowing dead reckoning where to look for that.
Yeah. Great job, Thomas. And next up, like just to line up what we expect to see here soon, is hopefully the landing burn, which would happen in about a minute, a bit less than a minute. And that is about 27 seconds of landing burn. I always underestimate how long it actually does the landing burn.
But just look at this. That is Michael's tracking camera. We are going to either have this thing until it crosses the horizon or MECO in about 30 seconds, because main engine cutoff is targeted for 8:03 in the timeline. This can vary by a second or two, so don't panic if it's off. But this is incredible. That is Michael's AI tracking that second stage still in the air.
Yeah, I feel like at this point we need to kind of launch Michael's tracking cameras with the payload so it can track longer. Like
Oh,
at some
and here
point,
comes the land. Okay, no, it's landing. It's still firing. Okay.
yeah. So watch out for the drone ship appearing very soon.
All right, second
Uh,
stage cutoff. That's a good velocity, so that should be a good orbit for the second stage. And here comes the first stage into land.
Yep, you can see it getting brighter on the drone ship, which is a good sign. We want to see that, and that looks very centered. And another successful landing for SpaceX. Touchdown.
Okay, what a visually stunning launch that was all around. I mean, the fact
Yeah.
that the booster after its entry burn had the moon not only illuminating it, but the clouds and the ocean down below it was incredible. The fact that Michael's tracking camera, I know we cut away from it, but I'm going to give it to them. I think he tracked that thing until main engine cutoff. That is absolutely incredible. Wow. And Thomas with that track of the entry burn was amazing. Kevin is confirming in our back channel Michael's camera actually had the second stage all the way to main engine cutoff. Nice. And now DOS's favorite view on launch day, a happy empty launch pad.
Wow. What a this launch was very, very cool to see. And just to give you a timeline about what's next for this payload, they will coast now until 26 minutes after launch, where the second stage will ignite again for 1 minute and 2 seconds, if I see this correctly. And after that, the Amazonas Nexus payload will deploy about 10 minutes later at 35 minutes and 44 seconds. So that's next for this. And yeah. This is so far looking.
To be fair, this is also the tracking camera with Michael's software right now. So when the launch is over, it does a dance apparently.
Wow. I can tell you there are some discussions going on the back channel as of right now.
There are, and yes. Oh, definitely on that. The suite of cameras that we have tracking this was incredible tonight. But yeah, but yes. Anyway, like we were saying, like you were saying, Adrian, here, we'll have a coast down to the equator, the reignition of the second stage, and then deployment into orbit, and that will be the completion of the Amazonas Nexus mission. And for those wondering how long it actually takes a satellite to raise itself from geostationary transfer orbit to its geostationary location, is really dependent on the type of satellite it is and the overall commissioning phase, which is basically the big fancy word for how quickly do they want to get it into operation and get it there. Satellites are capable of doing that raise within a couple of days, whereas others, if they have the time and they can be a bit more efficient in how they're using the propellant to burn at apogee to raise the perigee, if you've got a bit more time, some of them can take a couple of months to get to their final location. It's really just dependent on satellite and what the operator is looking to do in that regard.
Go. And I want to thank some more people here because we received a lot of super chats here, and we want to make sure to thank you all for this. Echo Deal with $10 saying, "When the moon hits your plume and it makes the light bloom." I will not sing this. I will just read it because I don't want to upset a lot of people with my singing. So there you go. Thank you a lot. Mans on Mars, prediction time by 2040 with new propulsion systems being developed. How fast will humans be able to reach Mars? Guesses. I'm even bad to predict things that are happening this year. I do not dare to predict 2040. And there we see a moon, a beautiful moon. Wow.
The moon, yes. Thank you, DOS, for getting the moon up here and properly focused and everything here today, because that was the source of the light that made that second stage plume visible to our cameras here. So incredible shot there of the nearly full moon over Kennedy tonight.
There we go. Thanking the moon for the amazing support during today's launch, kind of.
And somewhere Jack chants, "Moon, moon, moon, moon."
For sure. There's a shirt for that. Make sure to check out shop.nasasspaceflight.com.
There's a shirt for that. That could be our logo.
There's a shirt for that. Done. David Stoffel. Hey, evening everyone. Will be the launch on Friday. Sorry, I'm having trouble reading this right now. Will be at the launch on Friday. Where's a good place to watch in Titusville, and is the booster landing back in KC? So for the launch on Friday, what would be a good place to watch that, Chris?
Pulling up my notes to check the inclination, because this matters sometimes for viewing as well as time of day. So give me 1 second to actually get that really quickly.
Yeah, no problem. Just want to make sure that we can answer this for future Rocket Watchers.
Yes, indeed. Yes. So the launches this weekend. The one from the Kennedy Space Center is on Saturday, February 11th, just after midnight. It is a Starlink mission. Ooh, so it's inclined. Is it polar or 39 or that? Interesting. Well, in this case, you're basically going to want to pay attention to the overall trajectory of the that particular Starlink mission will be going on. If it's one of the southeast missions, so it is utilizing the more polar type corridor with that. So I would say go to Cape Canaveral, Port Canaveral, somewhere near Jetty Park, to Cocoa Beach, places like that. It is after midnight, so be aware and have your wits about you. But I would go south and marvel at how much that thing looks like it is going directly over top of you.
There we go. Let me see. Benjamin Brown talking about the time where Space Shuttle also created jellyfishes in the past.
Once. The shuttle did it once. It was STS-131. Discovery launched about 40 minutes before sunrise in April. It was absolutely gorgeous to see the main engines do that jellyfish plume. Absolutely incredible.
I'm not curious. Do you have the host panel up, or did you just know that out of your head?
I knew that off the top of my head. I didn't actually read what
Wow.
the host panel. Sorry. I'm not actually looking at the host panel. What does it say?
Wow.
Sorry.
I was like, wow, okay. Didn't even say the number.
I was there for it. So I mean, that morning is burned into my memory because the ISS came directly over Discovery on the launch pad 16 minutes before launch and went straight through a nearly full moon on its transit over Florida. It was bizarrely incredible, the visuals for that shuttle launch. Yep. Oh, I see what you mean. He actually put 133 in the question, or 131 in the question. No, yeah. I wasn't actually looking at that. No.
I'm kind of impressed right now. I'm not gonna lie, I'm always impressed. I know I shouldn't be impressed at this point anymore, but I'm always like, okay, of course he knew. Another by SA, Happy Monday. What launch number is this? In general, what launch number is this? Or this year? I think in general, this is the 202nd Falcon 9 mission.
Oh, hang on. I can tell you right now. Today was the 201st Falcon 9 launch.
Ah, there we go. And Rene with the Red Team member, thank you so much. David with a star purchase and saying, too bad I'm not blocking a face tonight. Yeah, that's not a thing for these. That's only a thing on camera operators. Anonymous with another star purchase. Thank you so much, Anonymous. Dougal with 5 Red Team memberships. Thank you so much for that. Echo Deal with another When the Moon Hits You Plume and It Makes the Light Bloom again. And I will not sing. I won't. Jewel with $25. Can we get a recreation of the Scooby-Doo Swamp Monster sound so I know what to listen for next time?
Oh God, no! No one's ears wants to hear me try to reproduce that sound. We've got it on. We've probably got it on some of our microphones. So we'll check on that, and if we've got it, we might put out the audio of that. Yeah.
That we maybe
For those of you wondering what we're talking about, the Merlin engines, the frequency with which they fire, it resonates on the panels of the vehicle assembly building, and it lets out an almost squeal-like sound as everything is resonating with the panels on the building. It's really cool to hear, actually, and it is only the Falcon 9s and Falcon Heavies that do it. No other rocket does it so far.
So cool that they probably have hit the right frequency and the right resonance, and just
and particularly it's the Merlins that are on the Block 5s that do it, because none of the Merlins before it did it. None of the Falcons before the Block 5 did it. In fact, the first time a Block 5 took off, we all kind of looked back at the VAB like, y'all right back there?
just like okay, somebody wants attention, I guess. So let's and then we have one more gifted memberships here from anonymous mycologist, which I think is Mushroom Scientist, with 5 red team memberships. So thank you for that as well. And that clears our queue. And we have one more goodie here, which is a picture from Michael Baylor, I believe, who took a streak shot for today's launch with the moon very much showcased here. And I think that's a beautiful picture we wanted to show here before we wrap up here. Okay, there we go in full screen. And with that, I want to thank Thomas, who was earlier on this launch broadcast and provided the amazing tracking we had of the entry burn. I want to thank Kevin, who operated in the background and made sure that we got all of these amazing views. And of course, I want to thank Chris Gebhardt, there we go, for being my co-host here today. Thanks for being with me here, Chris.
Always a pleasure, Adrian. And I do just need to say one other thing, because Alex wrote it in our back channel, and it's totally worth saying out loud on air. Alex says that whenever a Falcon 9 launches, you can hear 2 squeals at the press site, the VAB and Chris G. And he's not wrong on that. But Adrian, always a pleasure to be on, and good to see another satellite on its way to orbit, or on its way to its intended orbit, we should say, the GTO burn, still to come for Falcon 9.
There we go. And with that, we want to close this launch broadcast for today, and we thank you all for watching, and we will all see you at a later date with more launches.
Propulsion continues to be nominal.
RCP chamber pressure looks good. Toggling up. Roger, roll, Atlantic.
Water towers can fly! Yes!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight outside SCE off. Say again, SCE off.
Yikes. You bet. Okay. We don't need any more of these.